One more time, salawat. ایک روز جناب حسن اور حضرت شبیر ایک روز جناب حسن اور حضرت شبیر نانا سے بصد شوق یوں ہی کرتے تھے تقریر نانا سے بصد شوق یوں ہی کرتے تھے تقریر ہم دونوں میں سے کس کو ہے آپ کی توقیر پر اس کے سوا آپ کو منظور کس کی ہے تقریر فرمایا کہ تم مانیے قرآن ہو دونوں فرمایا کہ تم مانیے قرآن ہو دونوں واللہ کے مجھ نانا کی تم جان ہو دونوں ایک روز جناب حسن صلوات بار دیگر صلوات قاسم کی کہانی ہر دل کو رلاتی ہے مانو ہاں سناتی ہے قاسم کی کہانی ہر دل کو رلاتی ہے مانو ہاں سناتی ہے قاسم کی کہانی پھولوں نے کیا ماتم فروا نے کیا ماتم قاسم کی کہانی ہر دل کو رلاتی ہے مانو ہاں سناتی ہے قاسم کی کہانی صلوات بارے دیگر صلوات
بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. پہنچا جو رن میں شب رضی چاکا پہ سر حجت تمام کر کے وغا کی بکر رفر عرض کو دل وہ زکے جھکے نامیوں کے سر ماں سن کے بولی شکر خدا وندے بغیر و بر کنبے میں بات رہ گئی وہ کام ہو گیا بن باپ کے پیسر کا بڑا نام ہو گیا نرغہ وہ شامیوں کا وہ ایک غیرت کمر بھالے وہ آس پاس وہ تیغ قریب سر نیزے چبھوئے دل میں لئی انہوں نے اس قدر شبر کے نون حال کا ٹکڑے ہوا جگر تیروں سے سب چھنا ہوا تن گل بدن کا تھا قاسم کا جسم تھا کہ جنازہ حسن کا تھا زہرا تو کر رہی تھی یہ نوحہ بحال زار ناگاہ ظلم کی ہوئی بیچی جگر کے پاس گھوڑے پہ داغ مگانے لگا طفل گل عزار عباس کو تڑپ کے پکارا جگر فگار وقت آ گیا کہ آجے شہادت حصول ہو اب آخری سلام ہمارا قبول ہو اب آخری سلام ہمارا قبول ہو پہنچے جو لاش ابن حسن پر بحال زار دیکھا کہ سر کو کاٹنے والے ہیں بادشاہ غصے سے کانپنے لگے عباس نامدار للکار کے بڑھے صفت شیر کے دگار بھاگے ادو جو دار کے تو نقشہ بدل گیا ہلچل میں اس یتیم کا لاشا کچل گیا ہلچل میں اس یتیم کا لاشا کچل گیا اپنی ابا یہ کہہ کے بچھائی زمین پر سب چن لیے پڑے تھے جو ادھر ادھر کاندھے پہ لاش لے چلے عباس نامور روتے ہوئے حسین بھی پہنچے قریب در آواز دی کے بیاہ کے حسرت نکال لو، لو بھابی جان اپنی امانت سنبھال لو، زہرا تو کر رہی تھی یہ نوحہ بحال زار، ناگاہ ظلم کی ہوئی برچھی جگر
کے پاس،
گھوڑوں پہ داغ مگانے لگا طفل گل
آزار،
عباس کو تڑپ کے پکارا جگر
فگار،
وقت آ گیا کہ اوجے شہادت حصول ہو، اب آخری سلام ہمارا قبول ہو، اب آخری سلام ہمارا قبول ہو، پہنچا جو لاش ابن حسن پر بحال زار، دیکھا کہ سر کو کاٹنے والے ہے بچیار، غصے سے کانپنے لگے عباس نامدار، للکار کے بڑے صفت شیر کردگار، بھاگے ادو جو دوڑ کے تو نقشہ بدل گیا، ہلچل میں اس یتیم کا لاشا کچل گیا، ہلچل میں اس یتیم کا لاشا کچل گیا، اپنی ابا یہ کہہ کے بچھائی زمین پر، سب چن لیے پڑے تھے جو عزا ادھر ادھر، کاندھے پہ لاش لے چلے عباس نامور، روتے ہوئے حسین بھی پہنچے قریب در، آواز دی کہ بیاہ کے حسرت نکال لو، لو بھابی جان اپنی امانت سنبھال لو، پہنچا جو رن میں شبرزی جہاں کا پیسر، اللہم ٹھیک ہے، پر محمد وآل محمد صلوات،
اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد،
اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، ہاتھ اٹھے رہتے ہیں جب دیکھو دعا کے واسطے، ہاتھ اٹھے رہتے ہیں جب دیکھو دعا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، دعا گئے ان کو وسیگے مصطفیٰ کے واسطہ، دعا گئے ان کو وسیگے مصطفیٰ کے واسطے، مشکلیں دیتی پھرے مشکل کشا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، میں کسی کا دل جلانے کے لیے کہتا نہیں، میں کسی کا دل جلانے کے لیے کہتا نہیں، یا علی کہتا ہوں میں دل کی جلا کے واسطے، یا علی کہتا ہوں میں دل کی جلا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، آ کے مجلس میں حسین ابن علی کے نام پر، آ کے مجلس میں حسین ابن علی کے نام پر، ساتھ لیتے جاؤ کچھ روزے جزا کے واسطے، ساتھ لیتے جاؤ کچھ روزے جزا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، ہاتھ اٹھے رہتے ہیں جب دیکھو دعا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، دعا گئے ان کو وسیع مصطفیٰ کے واسطے، دعا گئے ان کو وسیع مصطفیٰ کے واسطے، مشکلیں دیتی پھرے مشکل کشا کے واسطے، مشکلیں دیتی پھرے مشکل کشا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، ہاتھ اٹھے رہتے ہیں جب دیکھو دعا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، میں کسی کا دل جلانے کے لیے کہتا نہیں، میں کسی کا دل جلانے کے لیے کہتا نہیں، یا علی کہتا ہوں میں دل کی جلا کے واسطے، یا علی کہتا ہوں میں دل کی جلا کے واسطے، اس قدر بیتاب ہے دل کربلا کے واسطے، آ کے مجلس میں حسین ابن علی کے نام پر، آ کے مجلس میں حسین ابن علی کے نام پر، ساتھ لیتے جاؤ کچھ روزے جزا کے واسطے، ساتھ لیتے جاؤ کچھ جزا کے واسطے، इस कदर बेताब है।
Muhammad wale Muhammad salawat. Very quick few announcements. Program in English Hall is going to be as usual. Program will start at 7:30 p.m. with Namaz Maghriban, followed by the Majlis starting at 8 p.m. Tomorrow night, the Shab of 9, tomorrow night, 8 Muharram, Alame Hazrat Abbas will be taken out in this hall after the English Majlis, and also they are going to be ziyarat of Alame Hazrat Abbas after the Urdu Majlis in the Urdu hall. Day after tomorrow, the Shab Ashur on Wednesday night, Tabut Hazrat Ali Akbar will also be taken out after the English Majlis in this hall, and also there are going to be a Tabut taken out after the Urdu Majlis in the Urdu hall. Please make a note of that. Our annual fundraising is going to be tomorrow. We're doing Azadari in both halls, and for many years this wouldn't be possible without your help and support. Inshallah, we're going to be doing a fundraising for 10 to 15 minutes tomorrow between the Majlis. So please bring any amount you're comfortable with. Without your support, we wouldn't be here. Lastly, please, before I invite Molana on the member, if you can keep the same setup as yesterday, only adults on the stage and children with their parents or under the supervision of an adult. So I'm going to invite Molana onto the member with a loud salawat, and please keep the same setup as yesterday. Bar Muhammad wali Muhammad salawat.
One more salawat, please.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Have one more salawat, please.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Rasulullah.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Have one more salawat, please. You're more welcome to come on the stage. I know yesterday there were people standing outside, so if anyone wants to come on the stage, more than welcome to come on the stage. Let's try another salawat, please.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Have one more salawat, please.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا أبو مولانا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أما بعد، قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإن من شيئته لإبراهيم صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
A series of discussions tonight have got into its 8th part. Yesterday we were looking at how one can cleanse the heart. Ultimately, how to connect to the Imam of the time, alayhi salam. The heart, as you know, is the Imam of the body, Imam al-Badan. But the heart itself cannot be controlled. They say the heart rests between the hands of Allah. That's why it's known as qalb. Qalb, qalaba, rotate. Heart is rotating, it's moving. This is why the term inqilab comes from qalb. Inqilab or revolution, revolution itself, revolve in the Latin, to move. Heart moves. And when the heart moves and there's a change of heart, that is what we call inqilab. Why? Because the essence of man changes. Movement of the heart is such that the essence changes, it becomes essential. So therefore when it comes to ishq, love of Ahlul Bayt, is the very same thing. It affects the heart and it goes deep inside the DNA of a human being, that once it changes, it can never change back again. This is the promise of Allah. This is the promise of the Ahlul Bayt, that truly when you're firm in this love of the Ahlul Bayt, there's only growth then. There's nothing called stagnation. If you truly understand what love is. This is why there's different stages of love. Look in the Quran and see. Look within our theology and see. Look within our philosophies and see. There's one part is hawa, one part may be hub, but there's something which is known as wud. Right? There's something, Allah's wadud. When the Quran says mawadda fil qurba, that mawadda is an active love. It isn't a passive love. There's a difference. Today when you look at some of the Sufi tariqats, they also claim to love Ahlul Bayt in the way that we do. But their love is passive many a time. Not all of them, but many a time it's passive. There's an active love as well that needs to be there. What is that active love and what is the first sign of that active love? The first sign of that active love is tawalla. And the second half of that active love is tabarra. Without tabarra, love is not activated. What does it mean? To love, to move towards those people who are the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, and to refrain and to move back from those people who are the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt. That is the formula. This is why the 6th Imam alayhi salam says, there's a famous tradition. And it's a profound tradition, especially for this day and age. It's a profound tradition. Imam says that there's certain people who claim to love us, but they attach themselves onto the furu of other people. If you truly are our lovers, come and attach to our branches. Come to our branches. Many a time we claim to love the Imam, but in our characteristics we're different. We go to different things. We go to different philosophies. We go to different theologies. Imam says there's certain people, and they claim to love us, but they attach themselves onto the furu of other people. What is the responsibility for those people who love the Ahlul Bayt? You come onto the pathway of the Ahlul Bayt by following what the Ahlul Bayt says. What is really the first sign? You love that which Ahlul Bayt love. What do they love then? When does the test come? The test comes twofold. Test comes in the ubudiyya of Allah. We go to Sada Salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One more salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One more salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What is the most important thing, therefore? Two things come to play. Battle of Safinatun is taking place. Amir al-Mu'mineen is walking towards his horse. A munafiq decides to come forward. He says, if I can slow Amir al-Mu'mineen down, it will give us enough time to kill him. He's the Imam of the time. Therefore, if I ask him a question, it's wajib on him to answer my question. Right? It's not wajib on the ulama to answer your questions, but it's wajib on the Imam to answer your questions. So Amir al-Mu'mineen begins to walk. And as he begins to walk, this guy thinks, I'm going to ask him the most difficult question that I can ask. And it's going to be so difficult that it's going to take Amir al-Mu'mineen 20 hours to answer it. Because it's that difficult. Comes forward. He says, Ya Ali, tell me something. He says, what? He says, Ya Ali, what is Islam? Amir al-Mu'mineen smiles. He says, is that all your question? He says, let me answer for you. As he's walking, puts one foot onto the saddle. He says, my brother, Islam is two things. Your duty to God and your duty to humanity. That's Islam. Wassalam. 1400 years later, we're still thinking what that means. Just remember one thing. Why is Islam such a primordial religion for? Why is Islam such a religion that appeals to everyone for? Truly, the nature of Islam, what does Allah say? Fitratullah allati fatara an-nasa alayha. Right? Islam hits the fitrah of man because it's attached to the fitrah of Allah. And man is attached to the fitrah of Allah. So everything that Islam has, if truly understood, appeals to your fitrah in such a way that it makes you into a better person, in such a way that you feel happy, in such a way that there's sakina, right? Peace in the heart. Islam is meant to take you into peace in an atmosphere, in a society, in a climate where there's a lack of peace. Today, if you look at Muslims, Muslims aren't at peace. Look at wider society, people in wider society aren't at peace. You find people who are depressed. We've got the highest level of depression in this era. And you've got the highest level of suicide in countries which claim to be first world countries. The best standard of living in the world is where? Scandinavia. And the highest amount of suicides are in Scandinavia. There is a correlation between people who believe in God. Go to the Middle East and see. Go to Africa and see. Why is the suicide rate so low? Remember, one person answered the question very beautifully. He says, I was in New York. I met a taxi driver. The taxi driver says, look, I'm having a really bad day today. It proves that God doesn't exist. I'm going through so much pain today, it means God doesn't exist. He goes to Cairo, meets another taxi driver. The taxi driver says, look, it's been a bad day for me, but alhamdulillah. Allah is testing me and I know He's going to elevate my status. This guy sat down and he said, what's happening here? One guy lives in a first world country. The other guy lives in a third world country. The third world country is content, but the first world country isn't content. He analyzed this, was a philosopher. He came to the conclusion, those people who have faith or belief in God, why? So then he takes it forward. He comes to Sayyid Hussain Nasr. You're a great philosopher in this country. Shia philosopher Sayyid Hussain Nasr. So they asked him, they said, what's the story behind it? He gave a beautiful reply. I was listening to his reply. He came to London a couple of years back. He gave a reply. He says, look, the people in the West ask the wrong questions, right? They ask the questions, for example, they say, look, there's evil in the world, therefore God doesn't exist. So they philosophize in that realm. They said, evil in the world, therefore God doesn't exist. That's not the question you need to be asking. There's another question which supersedes that. Just because there's evil in the world, just because there's corruption in the world, just because the world may be falling apart, doesn't negate the fact that there's a creator, right? Doesn't negate the fact. The entire world could be collapsing, but the fact is there's someone who created it. Your mind tells you that because God is God, then therefore He has to be just and kind and compassionate. He is. But just because you can't understand His justice doesn't mean that there's no God. The question is not this. The question is this. What is the purpose of life? Which destination are you going to? The premises is there that you've been created and there's a creator. So there's something far greater than that. Question is this. Why? Why have we been created and which direction we're going in? Many people don't look at the why, they look at the how. How we were created. But they don't look at the why we were created. Anyhow, without falling into a technical discussion, what I want to say is this. What is Islam? It appeals to the fitrah. Two things are found here. One, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, your duty to humanity. The other one is your duty to Allah. What is your duty to Allah? Prayer, fasting, Hajj, Zakat, Khums. All of these things, Tawalla, Tabarra. All of these things are what? Your duty towards Allah. What are your duty towards humanity? Your duty to humanity sometimes supersedes that. Why? Because we have tradition, even though they're equal. But the fact is this, Allah can forgive you for certain deeds. But when it comes to the huquq of people, at that stage it becomes very difficult for forgiveness to come in. That doesn't mean, nevertheless, that you don't pray. To sit down and say, well, Allah will forgive me. No, remember what the sins say, the major sins. To take a sin lightly in and of itself is a major sin. To take a sin lightly. Remember this. For your major sins is the shafa' of the Ahlul Bayt. Ahlul Bayt all your major sins. For your major sins, shafa' of the Ahlul Bayt is there. But for your minor sins that we're committing in this world, how does Allah wipe them out? Trial and tribulation that befalls your life. heart problems, family problems, financial problems, unrest, depression. All of these things are there to what? To clean you before you make that journey. So why do any of that in the first place? Why not try and refrain and then repent? Because what repentance does is it purifies you and it removes difficulty from your life. This is, remember a couple of nights ago we were talking about the philosophy of istighfar. Istighfar is such, it destroys everything. It destroys all of those minor sins. You know what Sayyid Ali Qadi says? He says, if you want nur to come in your heart, then after Asr time, at least do istighfar 70 times. Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. Every Asr time, do it. You'll see 70 times is not long, it'll take you a minute. Yeah, right, some people pray. If they do zikr in that rate, they'll be finished in 10 seconds. It's not much. But you know what he says? Qadi says, the great sign of Tawheed says. He says if a person does that after Asr, you'll see nur comes from their heart. It's a development process. 40 days it takes for it to kick in. But to truly see the effects requires 1 year. 1 year for any a'mal, you'll see you start flying. A person who prays tahajjud for a year without missing it out, you can see his abilities change or her ability change. Imagine a person who's been praying for 30, 40 years. Imagine that. Imagine a person who's been reciting Ziyarta Ashura for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Imagine the impact of a person there. So really, when you start cleansing the heart, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. You know, some people in the month of Ramadan will go and they'll worship Allah for 6 hours. And then the second day becomes 3 hours. And that Quran that you recited half a Quran in one day, the next day is like a quarter of the Quran. And then it becomes a page of the Quran. And then it becomes a line of the Quran. And then after that it's like, alhamdulillah, that's it. Let's forget the Quran for 15 days. Until Laylatul Qadr comes and you put it on your head. And that's as far as the Quran goes. No, that's not the case. The most important thing is this: short but sweet. Short but sweet. Do something but do it repetitively. You'll see spiritual change. As I said to you yesterday, there are two things that have immense power. One is salawat and one is istighfar. Let me ask you a question. Is there any guarantee you're going to live until tomorrow? Qadr of Allah is such. Above that is the qada of Allah. Qadr of Allah, you may look, you may predict for your own self. You have ilm jafr, ramal, nujum, whatever you may have. Prediction is you'll live 100 years. You don't know what the qada of Allah is. He can change something because of an action of yours. Things can change. Haven't we seen in the time of the Imam that there was a prediction that so-and-so was going to die? Silatul Rahim, Allah increases his life by 30 years. It happens. The Prophet, forget human beings now, look at the prophets. Nabi Musa is walking past a place. There's a tradition with Nabi Isa, Prophet of Allah, connected to Allah, says, look, this person's going to pass away. What happens? Next day he's still alive. Nabi of Allah. So they said, look, he's still alive. He says, look, Allah has another story for this individual. It's another plan for this individual. So what's our responsibility to do? Solution is there. You want to increase your life? Recite salawats. A person who recites a lot of salawats a day, you'll see their life increases. I'll give you a story. I remember once I was in the Haram of Ma'asama Qum. As I was walking out, Atul Ijtihadi was sitting there, right? So I went up to him to see what he was reciting. He's reciting. I realized he was reciting salawat. So he says, look, he says, son, have you ever seen me with a heart problem? Have you ever seen me with kidney problems? Have you ever seen any issues? He says, let me tell you an experience from my life. I'm going to emphasize this experience to you. He says, whatever hurdle came in my life, however problematic it was, through the sadaqah of 1,000 salawats a day, Allah removed that, especially in times of difficulty. He says, look at me, I'm probably fitter than most people who are young. Right? Take something practical away. You come to the Majlis of Imam Hussain, it's an entire university. Take something practical away. Take it away and implement it in your life. Go implement it. What? If you go through trial and tribulation, you make... You know, I remember once, I asked one of the Urafa. I said, look, you know, what is the best thing one needs to recite as another of this, an issue that comes into their life? And I tested this many a time. He says, make the nadhr that you recite 10,000 salawats. And if you want to really make it special, 10,000 salawats for Ummul Baneen. you will see Hazrat Abul Fadl Abbas will answer whatever it may be, even if it's a life and death situation. Even if it's... Well, look, as my topic today is not about dua and ta'weez and dhikr and wird. I was thinking, if we continue like this, I'm going to have to open up a shop at the back. But no, I'm Shia though, so we don't need to do that. But anyhow, look, everything is there, the solution is there. You won't have to go to anyone. I've heard that in America, people charge £1,000 for a ta'weez, £10,000 for a bigger ta'weez. I'll give you something you don't even require to give even a penny. Just go and put the quarter in the sadaqah box and start reciting salawats. And you'll see through the barakah of this, Zahra alayhi salam will do something very special for you. Very simple. Look, let me put it to you in another way. What is the point of believing in the Ahlul Bayt? When a problem comes, you have to go to other than Ahlul Bayt. What is the point of believing in the Ahlul Bayt when you have to go to other than Ahlul Bayt? You should have enough faith that one Ya Ali is sufficient to raise even the dead. In the realm of spirituality, the name of Amir al-Mu'mineen is very powerful. We looked at Ja'far Mujtahidi, how with it was a signature move, one hand, he used to hit a person on the chest, Ya Ali, get up. Person was cured. Many a time he's done that. There was a time he was in one of the hospitals, and he heard that there was a person by the name of Ali in the next ward who's suffering from cancer. He says, get me up. He says, why? He says, it doesn't look right that a guy by the name of Ali is suffering from cancer. He says, take me to him. Took him to him. He looks up, he says, son, how you feeling? He says, not good. He says, let me do something to you that you'll feel really good. He says, what is it? Takes his hand, hits it on the chest. He says, Ya Ali, now get up and go home. Next day the doctors came in and they said, you're a fraud. He says, why? He says, you cured that boy, but why don't you cure yourself? He says, listen, the person who contains Isma Adam doesn't use Isma Adam for themselves. Mashiach of Allah such, had that been the case, Hussain ibn Ali wouldn't have gone to Karbala. Right? Let me put it to you in another way so you can understand. Right? Imagine why Hussain went. People ask the question, isn't saving your life wajib? Why does Hussain go to Karbala knowing that there's imminent death there? Right? Up to that point there wasn't imminent death, but why does he go there? Why does he enact everything? Remember how Hussain did it, Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. Look how he did it. He sends people there to Kufa first, right? The Kufis are calling you. Ilm imamat is different, but he has to go through the stages. In the way that the Prophet comes to certain people and says, what do you think we should do? Not that the Prophet needs the advice. The fact is there needs to be motion in place. So in the same way Sayyid al-Shuhada does it. But one alim really answered the question. He said, look, to pray awwal waqt is the best. You got a time to pray, right? Fajr time comes, you've got an hour and a half to pray Fajr. Awwal waqt is afdal. But you can even pray 5 minutes before, technically speaking, and it will still be accepted in Allah. Hussein's awwal waqt was that he goes to Karbala. Had he not gone to Karbala, it wouldn't have been haram upon him. He still would have gone to Jannah. He's still the king of Jannah. His mother creates Jannah. But the fact is this, he was showing the world that even me needs to do something like this for the pleasure of Allah. Imam is teaching us, look, why? Ishq. Ishq. What pushes you to do an action? Ishq. Continuously. Look, otherwise you stop doing it. If there was no love, then people wouldn't be praying, oh, well, you see Ayatollah Bahjid when he cries in prayer? Nobody's forcing him to cry in his prayer. He cries out of ishq, yearning for Allah. Yearning for Allah. There used to be a guy from Tehran, right, who used to come and pray every morning behind Ayatollah Bahjid. Now imagine in the morning, 45 minutes drive. One day he sat there and he thought to himself, you know, I think this man could be a fraud. Right before the salam, he screams. He goes, what's the story behind that? Now Allah wanted to teach him a lesson as well. That night he goes to sleep. He made the qasd that I'm not going to go and pray. He goes, what's the point, 45 minutes? maybe there's something mashkook here. That night he went to sleep. He saw gardens, heaven, palaces. Heart was expanding. Remember, what is heaven? Heaven essentially goes back to the heart. It's a state of being as well, right? It's a state of being of happiness. Immense happiness. He was feeling immense happiness. All of a sudden he sees that from this immense happiness he's pushed back, and as the door begins to close of heaven, he shrieks and he screams. When he screams in his dream, he realizes when Bahjat prays and says Allahu Akbar, he goes into the realm of heaven. And when he does Allahu Akbar to finish, the door closes. This is why you see those tears that come out. He looks up and he gets up, gets in his car, drives full speed ahead. I won't advise you to drive at 100 miles an hour, but he does that. He gets there and he makes it for the prayer of Ayatollah Bahjat. Why? Ishq. Movement. Sometimes Allah pushes us so that we understand certain things. And sometimes you doubt. Don't worry about those doubts. Those doubts are fine. Those doubts are okay. Sometimes Allah makes you doubt. Why? Because through your doubt, when you go and remove the doubt, you find that your maratib stages increase. So that's why. Sometimes you doubt. It's okay. It's okay. Just have the faith that Ahlul Bayt will guide you. They've never left you so far. In the darkness of the night, when the lantern is lit, that darkness becomes what? Darkness on one side, but a small lantern. The world is, go to the Sahara Desert, darkness at night time, but a small lantern about this size guides you from one section to the other section. However much darkness and dhulamat there are, remember one thing, Sayyid al-Shuhada is that guide that takes you from one location to another location safely. This is why they say, embark upon the Safinatun of Hussain. Get on the Ark of Hussain. These are the nights to get on the Ark of Hussain. These are the nights to move forward in the love of Hussain. How do we do this? Connection to Ahlul Bayt. Look, I mentioned a particular section of the discussion a couple of nights ago in terms of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now, as you can see, one night Imam, one night Sayyidah, one night Imam. We're going to rotate it so we can understand. When we were talking about Nadir Ali being mentioned in Sunni traditions, some of the most famous scholars that we have, Nasrullah Burujurdi, for example, is still alive today. He says on the authority of Ayatollah Abdul Karim Kashmiri, the mountain that he used to walk, it was as if the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen was walking, right? He says something in regards to Nadir Ali, but before I come on to that, I'm going to say something that Abdul Karim Kashmiri himself says. He says, look, you know, when I was younger, I used to live in Kufa. He says that when I was in Kufa, there was a dervish who used to live there in Kufa, Mustawwar Ali Shah. He was a dervish of one of the dervish orders. He used to live there. He said that when I met him for the first time, he wasn't from the ulama, but he was a dervish. He says, I felt that this man was enlightened. He was enlightened. You could see the love of Amir al-Mu'mineen. So he said, the year that I moved to Kufa, that one year that I was there, he says, on the night of Ghadir, this man called me to say, come to my majlis, come to my mahfil. Purpose of that we're going to do dhikr of Ali, look at the fadail of Amir al-Mu'mineen, there's going to be Nara Haydris all night. Says, come, Ayatollah Kashmiri said, right, this is something I want to do. Remember, for the believer, they don't run away from the Naras. They come forward. Why? Because dhikr of Ali is ibadah, right? So he turns around and he says, look, I want to go and do ibadah. Remember what the Prophet of God says. The Prophet of God says that, look, to look at the face of Amir al-Mu'mineen is like looking at the Kaaba. It's like looking at your father. It's like looking at the Quran. This is why there was a very famous Sunni scholar recently. He was sitting there just staring at the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Somebody comes and says, Sheikh, don't you want to stand up and pray? He says, leave me, I'm doing ibadah. So Ayatollah Kashmiri says, you know, I went to the majlis of these Daravish. All night you could see they were enlightened. And he said, the fadail of Amir al-Mu'mineen, he goes, we can't even narrate it outside because you wouldn't be able to understand it. He says, the fadail of Amir al-Mu'mineen was such, all of a sudden I realized, only 15 minutes to go before Fajr, in his heart he thought to himself, I've never missed a prayer in the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now this Mustawwar Ali Shah was sitting there, he smiles. He said, you're worried about getting to the haram, aren't you? He says, yes, this is Kufa. And you know, Masjid al-Kufa takes half an hour to get to the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. In those days, imagine, there weren't even cars. Even if he got on a horse and he tried to ride, he wouldn't make it. right? And there were maybe a few cars, but there weren't taxis like there are today. So he says that I was just panicking at that stage when this Darvish looks up at me. He says, don't worry about it. He says to his student, son, take him to the Haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. This guy says, come. He's a young man. He says, come with me. So he said that he started to talk to me, but I could see in his heart that he was reciting dhikr of Allah. He was connected from his heart. Within 7 minutes, all of a sudden I realized that we're right on the Haram, on the door, Bab al-Qibla. He says to me, you go inside, for me now I need to go back. Sayatullah Kashmiri looks up and he says, yes, Najaf isn't a place for the Darvish. Some of the ulama, if they see you here, they may mock you. He says, I'm going back. You go and you do your prayers. At that moment he came to realize. He said that the one thing that unites these people is their love for Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is why if you notice, some of the greatest urafat that have ever lived did sajda on the door of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Go from the very beginning and see, who was the Muqaddis Ardabili, Amir al-Mu'mineen's haram. Ibn Ta'us, Amir al-Mu'mineen's haram, right? Ayatollah Bahjud, Amir al-Mu'mineen's haram, 14 years old. He's standing then the sahan of Amir al-Mu'mineen raising his hands after having recited Surah Baqarah in the first unit of prayer, Ala Imran in the second. 14-year-old boy, hands up, reciting Dua Abu Hamza Famali in Kunut. How does a kid do that? Why? Barakah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. You ever realize why mujtahids came out at 14, 15 in the Haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen? Sheikh Bahai, the tradition says, Sheikh Bahai was a master of Najum. And he was a master of geography. He made the entire Haram according to the planetary constellations. This is why the Haram of the Imam hasn't changed yet. Every other Haram has been excavated and remolded. Haram of the Imam has not changed. In the time of Mullah Sadra, they would say, go into this hujra and this is good for this subject. Go into that hujra and it's good for that subject. This is why you see people like Baqir al-Sadr Shaheed, at the age of 15 they were mujtahids, right? And the barakah of the Haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen is such. Why? Because the Amir al-Mu'mineen is the center of the universe. You design around the Imam and you'll see the barakah of the Imam goes into different places. If we could. Brothers, if we can, I've been given the signal. If we guys can just recite a salawat and come forward for some of the elders who are here, just so you can come on the stage. You can come forward, please. I'll put another way. If all the people at the back can just stand up. All of you brothers, my apologies for inconveniencing you. I've been told that there's people standing outside, standing next to the shoes, standing next to the doors. If all of you guys can just come forward with the salawat, please. One more salawat, please. One more salawat, please. One more salawat, please. Remember one thing. Why is it today that we send our children to Najaf to study? Because in the shadow of Amir al-Mu'mineen, not only intellectually but spiritually you climb. You become a monster if truly you know how to connect. Look, somebody asked Qadi a question. He says, how can you read people's minds of Amir? How can you read their entire wujud? Well, there were urafa like that. You know that in Qum especially. That in those days, or still today, the people like that who just look at you and they can tell your entire life. So they asked Qadi, they said, what amal did you do? He looked up and said, I didn't do any amal. They said, what did you do? He said, after praying tahajjud in the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I would go to Wadi al-Salam between Tulu'ain. Taqweenan, Allah gave me the power to be able to read somebody. If Wadi al-Salam has that much power, then imagine what the source has. The sun's rays make Wadi al-Salam, Wadi al-Salam. Have you ever thought why Adam and Nuh are on either side? The fathers of the entire Muslim nation, not just a Muslim nation, the father of the entire world probably said to themselves that we gave birth to all of these people. At least we should have an opportunity to be replenished next to Amir al-Mu'mineen. On the one side Adam, on the other side Nuh. Do you know how many Anbiya buried in Najaf alone? 330 Anbiya buried within Najaf. Do you know how many buried are in Karbala? 230 are buried in Karbala. Right? Make the connection with Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now coming back to the very beginning, what I wanted to say. Nasrullah Burujurdi says, and if we get time tomorrow, I'll give you the whole traditions on this. He says, if ever you have a problem, if ever you're stuck in a problem, Ayatollah Abdul Karim Kashmiri would come into the sahn of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He would recite Nade Ali 7 times, and he said, every problem I had, Allah removed. For those people who are going, now okay, you can ask me the question, which type of Nade Ali is? Now that's a different discussion for a different day. Yes, Ayatollah Kashmiri's Nade Ali may be different from all of yours, but it only differs by 1 or 2 words. He says that I would stand there. First thing is this, by the way. It's the Shia Nade Ali, not the Taqiyya Nade Ali. So now you can make up whatever you want from that. You know, sometimes we add on Bika, Fulan, and this and that. And you know, Azmat of Allah is great and Nabuwa is great and everything else, but that's not part of the real Nade Ali, by the way. Why would Rasulullah say Nade Ali and then he mentions his name and says, Allah for the mighty? He goes directly onto Biwalayatika Ya Ali. Right? Think about it. Why would I, you know, if I was standing, why would I say, for the sake of his Nabuwa, meaning my Nabuwa, and then after that go on Biwalayatika Ya Ali? Right? And then speak to the Urafa, they'll tell you what works and what doesn't work. So for example, Hayatullah Kashmiri says, 7 times you recited, your problem is hal. If ever you're worried about slander or tu'ma, 40 times in the morning, 40 times in the evening, no one can touch you. Even if you were to go into an entire room packed with enemies, you'd come out clean. And then they continue and say, for a person who has problem with rizq, for example, recite Nadeli 16 times. If a person has, and it goes up from 1 to 100. And then it says, and if you have an enemy, and that enemy is a strong enemy, and you want to know how to overcome that strong enemy, and you're not finding any refuge anywhere, 70 times. Amir al-Mu'mineen will take care of it. What does it say? Kullu hammin wa ghammin. So Amir al-Mu'mineen, right? You just have to call on him. Nada aliyan. Madhar al-ajaib, right? Madhar al-ajaib. And he comes very fast, and he removes all of your hum and your gham. Now it says, biwilayatika, ya Ali, ya Ali, ya Ali. So then they asked Ayatollah Kashmiri, he says, but if spiritually I want to gain the mawadda of the Ahlul Bayt, if I want to gain that liqa and that baqa, what do I do? He says, the same Nadeli Fajr time. He says, but there's one difference. Now recite Ya Ali 110 times. And you will see spiritually you'll start elevating. Maybe the next time you go to Najaf and you say salam to your Mawla, it's not ba'id that the reply may come back, wa alaykum as-salam. Everything goes back. Why? Because the more you repeat it, the more you... it's like prayer. Why do you recite prayers 5 times a day? And in that 5 times a day, 10 times you're reciting Iyyaka na'bud wa iyyaka nasta'in. Repetition does what? It's like a seed, it waters the heart. In the same way the dhikr of Ali is such, that it waters the heart. Right? So look, just to emphasize that. One day the Prophet of God was sitting there. One person comes to Rasulullah and he says, Ya Rasulullah, pray for me. I've fallen into problems. So he raises his hands and says, Bihaqqi Ali. Now the guy has another issue now. Why Bihaqqi Ali? He goes, second guy comes. He says, Ya Rasulullah, what a very serious problem. He says, don't worry, we'll solve it. He raises his hands. Bihaqqi Ali. I guess another issue comes into play. He goes as well. Third guy comes into play. Says, Bihaqqi Ali. So now some of these 3-4 guys are sitting down together, having a discussion. They said, you know, you went Bihaqqi Ali. He went Bihaqqi Ali. I went Bihaqqi Ali. Let's pray that Ali has a problem. Perhaps Rasulullah might say, Bihaqqi you, Bihaqqi me, Bihaqqi him. So it's fine. It just so happens in Medina, there was a day when Imam was feeling something. He comes to Rasulullah, he says, Ya Rasulullah, pray for me. He says, no problem. Bihaqqi Ali. So one tall man comes to Rasulullah and he says, look, Ya Rasulullah, I just want to answer this question. He says, what is it? He says, I came bihaqqi Ali. He came bihaqqi Ali. He came bihaqqi Ali. Ali came bihaqqi Ali. What do you do then? He says, even if I have a problem, I Rasulullah say bihaqqi Ali. Solution is solution is there. It's all there now. Now the $1,000 ta'weez and the $10,000 ta'weez seem quite redundant at this moment in time. We just have one power, and that power is worth more than anything that we can ever perceive. I'll give you a story that took place now that we're on the discussion of this. 2007, 2008, one of our friends went to Hamburg to lecture. Hamburg community is a nice community. It's quite a big community. And they have one center, and everyone comes to that center. So the Sayyid who was lecturing there, when he was leaving his country of origin, a woman came to him and said, look, my son, for whatever reason, has become a murtad. Can you go to him and have a conversation with him, maybe try and convince him to revert back? He says, fine, if I get an opportunity, I'll do that. So the Sayyid says, he goes, I got there and I put out the word that, listen, I'm here. So if you want to meet me, then you can meet me. So he said, well, obviously, nobody came. One day goes by, 2 days goes by. On the 7th day, he says, look, if he's not going to meet me, let me go and meet him. So he says, I came to his door and I knocked on his door. So the guy opened the door. So I looked at him and I thought, look, this guy's fresh, looking good, looking well, looking relaxed. So he says to him, look, we're from the East, you're from the East. Our adab says that when a guest comes to the door, you invite him in. He says, I have no problem. You can come inside and sit inside. He says, listen, son, I'm not here to convert you. I just want to ask you a question. He says, go on. He says, why did you leave Islam for? He says, I was waiting for somebody to ask me that question. Let me tell you something. He says, I was a student. I came from my country to university in Hamburg to study. When I got there, something happened that I didn't have the funds. I came to the local mosque, and when I came to the local mosque, people just turned me away. I eventually got to the stage where I didn't have a place to live, I didn't have any work, I had no money to pay for my university. I ended up in the Central Park on the bench. Now remember, first lesson is this. If we're going to advance as a community, and this is a side note by the way, but now that we're all together, if we're going to advance, we as a community need to take care of our youth. Not everyone's affluent in this community. There are kids who want to go to university, but they can't afford it. If we as a community are a living community, take the messages from the Ahlul Bayt and make sure there's something there so that their accommodation and their education and their higher education can be taken. And if you want the hadith, I will back it up with so many hadith that you will feel haram not to do it. Right? But we need something like that. Why? Ahlul Bayt. 6th Imam says. And if I pump it up with the hadith, and I'll do that maybe another time. But the most important thing here is this. So this young man then turns around and he says, I was lying on the bench. Hamburg gets cold. It was freezing cold. I didn't know where to go. He said, a man came to me, tapped me on the shoulder, says, son, do you want a job? No. Do you want a place to stay? Do you want to pay for your education? He looked up and he said, are you an angel? He said, no, I'm a Christian. He was a missionary. Look at the compassion. Learn it. Nabi Isa is our prophet as well. Learn compassion. This is what Rasulullah says. He says, look, hikmah is the lost camel of the believer. Wherever you find it, grab it. There's goodness in humanity. Nabi Isa is our prophet. We should be applying it. This man was applying it. He says, but on one condition. He says, what is it? Leave Islam and become Christian. So the young man thought, he said to himself, look, Islam hasn't really given me much. I've come here, no place to sleep, no place to rest, no university, no house, no nothing. What am I losing out? Let me become Christian. So here the Sayyid said, he said, look, I listened to him and my 5 minutes were up. But even though my 5 minutes were up, I said to him, can I give you a hadith? So he says, fine. He gave us a hadith. He says, I'll be on my way. I don't want anything more from you. He says, he said, let me give you a hadith. He said, a person came to the 8th Imam. He said to him, Maula, I'm poor. Maula, I have a lot of problems, I'm poor. Can you give me money? Maula replied and he said, look, you know what? You have enough, just thank Allah. Now remember, if Maula says that, that truly means that it's good for you. Right? Because whatever the Imam says, he's the mistaq of the ayah of the Quran, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. That means there's khair in that. So he turns around and he says, look, you know, you've got enough money. Again, the guy insists. He says, it's okay. Again, he insists. He says, it's okay. On the fourth time, he says, look, do you believe in me as the Imam of the time? He says, I believe in you, the Imam of the time. He says, do you believe me if I was to give the hukum, this entire room would be full of gold? He says, it would be. He says, I can do that for you. The guy got happy. He says, Maula, I'm ready for it. You just do it, I'm going to invest it. Right? Well, he didn't say that literally, but what he would have said if he was today. So, Imam says to him, look, one condition. He says, what is that condition? He says, I'll give you all the gold that you want, even I'll give you even more than that. You'll be the richest man in the world, wealth-wise. But I want you to give me something so I can give you something. He says, what do you want me to give you? He says, take out the love of Zahara and Amir al-Mu'mineen from your heart and I'll give you whatever you want. The guy turns around and he says, Maula, I've got enough wealth. Sayyid says, I said that, I got up and I walked out. 9th of Muharram came, the room was packed like this. He says, the door opened, this young man starts running. He ran to my feet, he grabbed him. He says, I can't believe I sacrificed the love of Zahara for the sake of this world. The next time you find that there's issues and problems and you're despairing, remember one thing. You have all the wealth you need. You know what that wealth is? Your iman. The fact that you can cry for Hussain, that's worth more than $1 billion. $1 billion on one side and the tears that you shed for Hussain on the other side. What is life? How long are you going to live for? You can't eat it. You can't take it into your grave. Where you're going back to them. And your mother's prayed for you to be on their pathway. What more do you need? What more do you need? In the deepest moments of your life, at least take some respite in the fact that they're in charge. Allah is in control. I don't need anything else. When you have that belief that God is in control, then God makes things happen, even if they're not to happen. It's all about submission. If today I submit to the will of God, you've seen, we've heard from ulama, we made the wrong decision, but we made it in such sincerity that Allah made it the right decision. We were about to fall off the bridge. Allah made it in a way that He preserved us. We were about to leave. Allah made it in such a way that He brought us back. He was about to die, but our sincerity was such that Allah brought it back. What is it? Sincerity. Look, don't ever think that there's no power there. There's a great power there. Utilize that power. Make that connection. So look, our discussion is getting quite wide and it's spreading. But I want to say to you just one more thing. Remember the tradition that we said yesterday. There are two things we said, that build a human being, that stop bala from coming down in the life of a human being. Two things we said. One, silatul rahim. Allah increases your life. Allah increases your life. You know, if you're going through trial and tribulation, and I know some of you are, try this. Phone your mother, phone your father, have a conversation with your brothers and sisters. You see the effect. Secondly, neighbor. Your neighbor has haqq over you. Fulfill the haqq of your neighbor. You know what the first stage is? To empathize with another person. You know, in this day and age, right? We're unable to look through the eyes of another person. You don't understand the circumstance, situation. We're straight away blaming somebody. The minute somebody does something to us that we don't like, straight away you blame somebody. But look how many excuses you make for yourself. Why don't you make the same excuses for somebody else? The day you start hiding people's sins and making excuses for somebody else, you will then see how the barakah of Allah comes in your life, that you will see Allah will make excuses for you. They're traditions. They say when the most la'een, wretched man in creation looks up at the skies and says, Ya Ghaffar, Allah says to the angels, don't answer him. He's a sinner. Second time that person says, Ya Ghaffar, again Allah says, don't answer him, the sinner. Hadith says, but when the third time he beseeches, Allah says to his angels, now go quickly and answer him. But Allah, he's a sinner. He says he may be a sinner, but there's no one else that he has but me. If I leave him, which door is he going to go to? Right? Which door? You're at the right place. You're at the door of the Ahlul Bayt. Connect. How does one connect? Submit. Submit to the will of the Ahlul Bayt. Make them your guardians. So this is known as wilaya. Batin of wilaya is just that. When you have faith that your Imam is with you. Maytham at-Tammar. Look at the faith that he had. They said that when they hung him, his daughter came in the way. He says, get out of my way. She says, Father, I can't see you like this. He says, get out of my way. Don't distract me. At this moment, I'm drenched in the wilaya of Amir al-Mu'mineen. I'm seeing my Mawla. I'm seeing my Mawla. They cut his stomach. When they pulled his tongue, what happened? Still you could see Ali, Ali, Ali. Look at Salman. Salman's body is lying there. Madain was the place. His body was there. What does Amir al-Mu'mineen do? When he stands, it says, Salam to Salman. Salman stands up. Why? Wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When you become Ashiq of Amir al-Mu'mineen, when you become a Waliullah, then this world or the next world doesn't make a difference. Why? Because we've been created for them. That's what love is. That's what love is. Anyhow, inshallah, we'll continue our discussion tomorrow. There's much to discuss. There's much to discuss. But it's beautiful that within these majalis you see, it's majalis of ishq. Majalis of the Ahlul Bayt. When I look around the room, I see one person sitting there. You can tell he's connected, he's crying, tears in his eyes, and we're not even at the masayib. You look at another person, you look at some elders. You know what this is? This means that there's collective ishq. This is what Ahlul Bayt wants, for us to be united. To grieve for the sake of the Ahlul Bayt together, and to be happy for the sake of the Ahlul Bayt together. Remember the very first thing that I said? I said there's certain people who Zahra loves. There's certain people who Imam Hussain has a special karam over. It's like he puts his hand over their head. You know the condition for those people are? Those people who Imam Hussain puts his hand over their head? They're those people who when they come to the Majlis of Hussain, they're just looking for the name Hussain to be mentioned, and tears come in their eyes. This is what ulama have said. If you truly want to know how much wilaya you have in your chest, if you truly want to know how much of a Shia you are, just look and see. If the name Hussain is mentioned and tears come into your eyes, thank Allah. You're one of the special ones. You're one of those people who Zahra prays for. You're one of those people who Hussain prays for. You know what? You're one of those people who Sakina's du'as are with. Why is that? Because she didn't want her father to be lonely. She didn't want her father to be lonely. What does she say to her grandmother? Grandmother, is my father still lonely today? No, Sakina. Look and see how many millions of people that there are. How many people there are coming towards Hussain. Tonight, we're going to give condolences to Imam Hassan. I just want you to remember one thing. From all of the people we're mentioning on these nights, Hassan was a yatim. Crying away tonight that you give the haqq of a yatim whose father's not there. Let me give you a tradition. I'm going to recite slowly. You go into your own khalwa. For 1 second, just imagine. If you were sitting next to the grave of Imam Hassan, how would you give condolences to your Mawla? I'm going to recite slowly. If Allah gives me the energy to recite. There was a wa'iz in Karbala. He would recite the masayib of Imam Hassan. One night he goes to sleep. In his sleep he sees that all of a sudden the hukum is given, stand up. He says, why? He says, Fatimatul Zahra alayhi salam is coming. She comes forward and she says, my wa'iz, why don't you recite the masayib of my son Hassan. He says, my mistress, I recite the masayib of your Hassan. I recite the fact that when he was poisoned, and that poison was cutting his liver, he was so embarrassed even to vomit because he knew his sisters were there behind the door. When he vomited, he says to Imam Hussain, hide the vomit. He says, why, brother? He says, because Zainab is coming. He says, the masayib of your son is such I recite. He says, people go to their wife for comfort. His wife poisoned him. So Zahra says, look, those are the masayib of my son. But they're not the deepest masayib of my son. He says, but Zahra, I also recite the fact that when Imam Hassan was lying there moving from one side to another when poison was affecting him, a 1.5-year-old baby was crawling on the floor. As he was crawling on the floor, Imam grabs the baby and puts him close to his chest. When he puts him close to his chest, Farwa comes forward and she just says one thing. She says, can I take Qasim? I can see you're in pain. Imam replies, says, Farwa, leave him. Tomorrow my son's going to be yatim. Tomorrow he's going to be alone. Tomorrow he's not going to have a father. Let me hold on to my son. Right? Zahra says, these are the masayib of my son, but they're not the greatest masayib of my son. He replies and he says, Zahra, I recite the fact that when his janazah was being taken, they fired arrows into his body. From head to toe he was covered in arrows. That Sayyidah Zainab sat there, tears in her eyes. One by one she pulled out every arrow from the body of Imam Hassan. He says that these are the masayib. But again, they're not the greatest masayib of my son. Shall I tell you something? Have you ever seen a young woman who's lost her husband? Young woman. Farwa was young, she lost her husband. I've seen myself that when a woman loses her husband young, if she only has one child, all of her love and attention is focused upon that one child. She feels the pain more when the child is upset. Imagine that. The first day when the child takes his footsteps, she becomes happy, but then she's sad again that my husband isn't here. The first day the child begins to talk, she becomes happy, but she remembers her husband. You know what the tradition says? The tradition said the day of Eid came. All of the fathers took their sons to Masjid al-Nabawi. A 7-year-old boy was walking towards Jannatul Baqi. As he walked towards Jannatul Baqi, he sat next to the grave of his father. He says, Father, if only you were alive today, you would take me by the hand as well and take me towards the prayer. Imagine Qasim. Says, I recite that as well. Zahra says, these are the masayib of my son, but they're not the greatest masayib of my son. He looks up and he says, then I don't know the greatest masayib of your son. She replies, she says, shall I tell you the greatest masayib of my son? She says, yes. Says, the greatest masayib of my son is this. My son was only 5 years old. He was standing outside. Hussain was standing inside. Fidda would ask, she would say, Hassan, why'd you cry more than Hussain for after your mother? He replied and he said, Fidda, I was outside, Hussain was inside. Says, son, what did you see? Said, I saw somebody was bringing fire to the door of my mother. I was trying to stop them. They brought that fire. Don't ever raise your voices in front of your partners when the child is standing there. You may reconcile tomorrow, but that child, it scars them. No, Zahra says, my son was standing there. They were bringing fire. I went to the door. I grabbed onto the door. They hit my hand. When they hit my hand, I went behind the door to protect my hijab. When I was behind the door, a man comes forward and he kicked the door. When he kicked the door, my back went into the wall. The door went into my chest. A nail went in. The blood started to flow. As the blood flowed, my son was watching. And as he was watching, he was trying to come towards me when another man came and he hit me in the stomach. As I went down, one more man came. He hit me on the back of the head. Hassan's masayib was to see his mother in that state. Look, I'm reciting slowly. Qasim tonight, right? Tradition says 9th of Muharram comes. If you can listen to this, listen to this. 9th of Muharram comes. One by one, Sayyid al-Shuhada is reading out all the names who are going to be shaheed. One 13-year-old boy gets up, says, "Uncle, is my name written on this as well?" Sayyid al-Shuhada replies, he says, "Even your brother Ali Asghar's name is written on this." Hashimi Ghairat couldn't take it. He says, "Uncle, you're telling me these men are going to come inside the tent?" He says, "No." He didn't tell him what's going to happen in Sham al-Ghariba. He knew Qasim wouldn't be able to take it. Who would be able to take it that your mother's hijab is pulled off? Look, shall I tell you one thing? If your daughter was forced to walk without her hijab in downtown and everybody was looking as a father, you'd die. Now imagine Qasim, Ghaira of Hashimi Ghaira. Sayyid al-Shuhada says, "No, son. I'm going to go with Ali Asghar to the battlefield." 9th of Muharram goes. Ashura day comes. Mother's watching. "Qasim, why haven't you gone into the battlefield for?" Qasim says, "Uncle doesn't give me ijazah." Comes back again. "Qasim, why haven't you gone into the Uncle doesn't give me ijazah." They say Farwa was coming out of the tent. She went into the tent of Sayyidah Zainab. As she was talking to Zainab, remember, widowed, son is a yatim. Yatim, mothers who have yatim children, they hear their children more. They feel the pain of their children more. You know what? She says all of a sudden to Sayyidah Zainab, "I can hear my son is crying. Let me go and see how he is." In the tradition it says she walks into the tent, she sees his son has his arms around his legs, puts his head in and he's crying. Says, "Son, why are you crying for?" Says, "Because Uncle doesn't give me ijazah to go into the battlefield for." At that moment, Farwa says, "When your father was leaving this world, he wrote a ta'weez, tied it on your hand, said, 'Farwa, if ever a moment comes, open it up. See, what does it say?' She says that this is the worst time. Let me open it up for you." He opens it up and he reads it and he begins to smile. What did it say? It says, "Waladi Qasim, إذا وجدت أمك الحسين غريبا وحيدا أدشانا مظلوما." If you ever see your uncle Hussain مظلوم, gharib, thirsty, staying there, go and give your life. Runs towards Hussain, says, "My father has written this for you." As he reads it, the tradition says, Sayyid al-Shuhada looks towards Baqi, says, "Brother, even in this time of ghurba, you didn't forget me." Tradition says this, Qasim was small. Qasim is unique from everyone. You know why? Because when Qasim went into the battlefield, he wasn't even baligh and he went. Tradition says, it says uncle came to put armor over him. You know why they put armor? Shall I tell you? Armor protected a body from spears, from swords, but more importantly, when a person fell on the ground, horses, when they trampled over a body, the armor would protect the body from being broken. If Qasim's body was broken, everyone else's body was shattered, but it was after their death. Qasim's body was before their death. If you can see what Imam Zaman says, right? Imam Zaman, when he talks about a broken body in Ziyarat al-Nahya, look at what he said. He says, "Salam on my Jad, whose right rib came out of his left side, and whose left rib came out of his right side." Salam on my Jud, whose head was cut like an animal's and raised on a spear. Salam on the 4-year-old daughter of my Jud, whose cheeks turned color. Abul Fadl Abbas comes forward. Imam Hussain raises Qasim onto the horse, says, son, no armor fits you. Qasim, go into the battlefield. Qasim rises into the battlefield. One by one he's fighting. One person he kills. 2 person he kills. 3 person he kills. Finally, they say a warrior stands up, and that warrior says, let me send my son. First son he sends, Qasim kills him. He had 6 sons. One by one, every warrior comes, all of them die. This warrior, they say, he was heavy on 1,000 men. He says to Umar ibn Sa'd, let me now go and kill him. One hand he had a sword, the other one he had a cane. As he walked in, you know what Sayyid al-Shuhada did? Looked towards the skies, said, Allah, this son of mine is so small. And this warrior is so big. Allah, protect my son. Man comes to hit. Qasim kills him. At the point Qasim kills, Umar ibn Sa'd gives the hukum. Now army, go and kill him. The entire army ascends upon Qasim. One person attacks from the back. One person attacks from the front. One person attacks from the side. They say a person comes with a sword, hits Qasim on the back of the head. Qasim begins to fall. As he begins to fall, he was young. You know what he does? The only person in the maqtal looks up at the tent, says, mother, come and help me because I'm falling. Sayyid al-Shuhada, like a lion comes. Abul Fadl Abbas, like a lion comes. Horses begin to ride. One horse goes over one rib. One horse goes over another rib. My heart tells me, Hussain comes there, takes his abba off, puts it on the ground, picks one piece up, picks another piece up, picks another piece up, looks towards Medina. Brother, come and help me. Brother, come and help me. In the riwayat it says, Farwa stands up, looks towards Sayyidah Zainab, says, Zainab, my son, 13 years old, was tall. Hussain is bringing something on the back of his back. What is this that he's bringing? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. You know what the tradition says? I'm going to give one final wasila. I finished. I'm just going to give one final wasila. Hussain brings something in his abba. When he puts it down, one mother comes. Eyesight giving way. She opens it up. She closes it. She looks towards Medina. She says, my husband, you gave me a gift. Come and see what's happened to your son. Matam Hussain.
लाशा कासिम का नजर आया, हसन याद आए। 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 लाशा कासिम का नजर आया, हसन याद। उस घड़ी रोए बहुत, उस घड़ी रो اے بہت شے کو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، اس گھڑی رو اے بہت، اس گھڑی رو اے بہت شے کو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، ہائے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے، ہائے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے، رو کے سینے سے ہے، رو کے سینے سے لگایا تو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، ٹکڑے قاسم کے چنے اور ابا میں ڈالے، ٹکڑے قاسم کے چنے اور ابا میں ڈالے، باندھ کر لاشا ہے، باندھ کر لاشا اٹھایا تو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، اس گھڑی رو اے بہت، اس گھڑی رو اے بہت شے کو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، فیضی شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے، فیضی شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے، زخمی تیروں کے ہے، زخمی تیروں کے جنازے میں حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، مہدی ارمانوں کی ہاتھوں میں لگا کر مانے، مہدی ارمانوں کی ہاتھوں میں لگا کر مانے، سہرا ماتے پہ ہے، سہرا ماتے پہ سجایا تو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، ہائے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے، ہائے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے، رو کے سینے سے ہے، رو کے سینے سے لگایا تو حسن یاد آئے، لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، اس گھڑی رو اے بہت، اس گھڑی رو اے بہت، شے کو حسن یاد آئے، لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا، حسن یاد آئے، یا حسین 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 حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، اللہم صلی علی محمد۔
السلام علیکم یا ابا عبداللہ، السلام علیکم ابن رسول اللہ، السلام علیکم ابن امیر المومنین و ابن سید الوصیین، السلام علیکم ابن فاطمہ الزہرا سیدۃ نساء العالمین، السلام علیکم آقا جمین و رحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکم یا غریب الغرباء، السلام علیکم یا الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکم یا شمس الشموس، السلام علیکم یا انیس النفوس، السلام علیکم یا ایھا الرضا راضی والقد والقضا، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکم یا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام علیکم یا خلیفۃ الرحمن، السلام علیکم یا امام الانس والجان، السلام علیکم یا مصر الایمان، السلام علیکم یا شریک القرآن، اجل اللہ تعالی فرجک وصال اللہ مخرجک و ظہورک، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ۔ اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔